Bryan, I'd like you to introduce yourself, but I guess maybe by way of introduction, I mean, we're extremely interested in this because the post office in 1999, in the height of the dot-com bubble, had the vision of creating a future-oriented system in which they could network all the sub-postmasters across the country to efficiently account for their work and actually create e-services across the post offices. So it was quite a visionary system, but it obviously went wrong. It has become the quite notable Post Office Horizon scandal. You started covering that with Computer Weekly. Maybe you could speak about how you and Computer Weekly began covering this, how it arose, and how you saw this scandal evolving over time.
Yeah, very, very happy to talk about all that. Yeah, I mean, Computer Weekly's first brief involvement with what we now know as the post office scandal actually came as long ago as 2004, when one of my predecessors at Computer Weekly received a letter, written, a proper letter, physical in the post, back in those sort of days, from a chap called Alan Bates, who used to run a post office in North Wales. And he was basically saying, look, I think I know a little bit about computers. I was given this new computer system by the post office. More or less as soon as I got it, all my accounts started going wrong. And when I got into a dispute with the post office, basically they sacked me and said it was my fault. I still think it's the computers and nobody wants to listen to me. Now, the chap that he wrote to was a chap called Tony Collins. Tony got back to Alan and said, this sounds really interesting, but you know, it's only you saying this. We can't write a story from one person, but please keep in touch.
Okay.
4 years later, Tony got another letter from a chap called Lee Castleton, which basically said exactly the same thing. Lee was a sub-postmaster as well. When the Horizon computer system would have been installed in his branch, all of a sudden his accounts stopped adding up correctly. And again, you know, Lee lost his job. He eventually got made bankrupt, lost his livelihood, his life, his children's lives were destroyed. And Tony saw this letter from Lee, remembered the one from Alan Bates, and sort of said, okay, maybe we have got a story. Tony sort of commissioned and worked with a young reporter on the Computer Weekly team at that time called Rebecca Thompson. Rebecca had a background in local newspapers, so she was very good at, you know, digging through archives of newspapers and at talking to, you know, she wasn't a techie, she wasn't a traditional tech journalist, she was very good at talking to people, ordinary people in the street, so to speak. And Rebecca did an investigation and she found a number of other people who all had a very, very similar story to tell. Some of them were very cautious about talking to the press because their lives, in their eyes, had been ruined by the post office. They didn't want to go through that again. The 7 of them agreed to talk to her on the record. Alan Bates was one, Lee Castleton was another, Joe Hamilton, who's another of the names that have become very well known, associated with the post office scandal, was one of those 7 as well. And they all told exactly the same story. They all said, I've been running a successful branch, everything was going fine, this computer system comes in and suddenly the numbers don't add up. They had variously lost their jobs, been bankrupted, gone to prison, been given a criminal record and convicted of anything from, you know, fraud to false accounting. And the one thing that they all said was, when I said to the post office that it's a problem with the computer system, the post office said, no, it can't be the post office system, the computer system, because you're the only person who's getting problems.
Yes. Yeah.
And when Computer Weekly published the results of that investigation in May 2009, for many of those people, that was the first time they found out they weren't the only one who was having those problems.
Yes.
And that started the ball rolling in many ways. Alan Bates, got in touch with all of these people. He'd been finding a few people himself, and gradually this started the ball rolling. Alan found more and more people who had a very similar story to tell. And when Computer Weekly then started interrogating the post office more about, have you got a problem here? They were aggressively denying it, dismissing these individuals as troublemakers, as people who had been found guilty in a court of law, and were just bitter about it and wanted to get their own back. But I remember quite early on in this process, and I joined Computer Weekly in November 2009, so I wasn't there for the original stories, but picked it up soon afterwards. And one of the things that the Post Office kept saying to us is, there are no bugs in our software. If there were bugs in our software, we would know about it, because people, as soon as something goes wrong, this software is being used in 12,000 branches. It's processing millions of pounds worth of transactions a day. If there was some systemic flaw in this software, we would know about it. And I listened to that, and my colleagues in the team listened to that and said, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how software bugs affect systems. And that set off alarm bells for us, saying, do they really understand what's going on in this computer system? And then, very slowly the ball got rolling. More journalists got interested. Private Eye got interested. BBC Panorama did a few documentaries. MPs got interested. It started getting talked about in Parliament. And over a period of time, as we all know now, that led to a private court case that Alan Bates and his campaign group put through in 2018-19, where they proved definitively in a court of law that bugs in the Horizon software could be responsible, and in many cases were responsible, for the accounting errors that people had been prosecuted for. And then, nearly 2 years ago now, start of 2024, the ITV drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, comes out, and that changed everything for everybody who had been involved. We at Computer Weekly and everybody who'd been taking an interest and trying to make a noise about this scandal for many years, finally that television drama broke the dam. Less than 10 days after that TV drama, then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood up in the Commons and said, we're going to pass legislation to exonerate all of the postmasters. It's the first time in the history of the British Parliament that the executive, the government, has passed legislation to overrule a decision of the judiciary. And in this case, it was over 900 decisions of the judiciary. So, a phenomenal turnaround, a very long process to get there, and of course it's still not over. A lot of the sub postmasters are still fighting for redress and compensation. Horizon is still being used in the post office. They are struggling to move away from it. It is still causing accounting errors today. Just the post office doesn't pursue them anymore, and in fact it's costing the post office millions of pounds every year, because they're just writing off the losses now. So even now, more than 25 years late on from when Horizon was first put in 1999, in the middle of the dot-com boom, as you say, the problems still exist.
Why did it take that TV program, the Bates versus the post office, or the post office versus Bates? Is there something about IT that is too difficult for people to understand, or is it just not publicly interesting, or what? How do you? For a long time, it was very much the case that people looked at it and thought, oh, it's a computer story. Computers are boring. There was no political element to it, so political journalists didn't really take an interest in it. It was complex to tell, complex to understand. But what we also know now
in the background, Alan Bates had been contacting all the broadcasters, all the national newspapers, not getting any interest. After Computer Weekly wrote its initial story in 2009, we now know that some people started to take it a bit more seriously, and that newspapers and broadcasters were getting in touch with the post office and saying, what's going on here? What's happening with this computer system? And the post office basically said to them, don't touch it. It is a non-story. It's not true. We will be considering legal action. All this sort of thing. And they all stepped back and said, okay, we're not going to touch it.
Okay.
So it was a combination of, the lack of understanding of how technology works at that sort of time, the difficulty of telling what people saw as a boring computer story about accounting software, and what we now know was an active campaign by the post office to try and keep this out of mainstream media.
Yeah. Well, it seems, from what I've read, Computer Weekly has done a great job in looking at the actual flaws, the IT flaws, and from even before the Horizon system. And when did it begin? Was it the very first iteration of this, responsible for all the downstream errors, or?
Well, the scandal that we most know about, which is the Horizon scandal. Like so many of these scandals and like many IT disasters, it's a perfect storm of events that came together to make it happen. And arguably, if any one of those elements of that perfect storm weren't there, maybe things might not have gone the way they did. But yeah, absolutely, it started from a really, really bad IT project. Horizon was born out of a big government IT contract that was signed in 1995 called Pathway, which was signed with the then Benefits Agency, what would now be the Department for Work and Pensions. And the idea was they wanted to automate benefits payments. So, instead of people going up to a post office or a job centre or whatever and getting their dole money in cash, it would be paid directly into their bank accounts. And the idea was that all benefits claimants would be given a smart card, a plastic card with a strip across the back of it that they would use to claim their benefits. And in order to do this, you would have to automate all of the post office branches around the UK, because all the largely post office branches were still manual accounting. Yeah. Fujitsu won the contract or ICL as they were then, it was still ICL in those days. ICL won the contract to deliver Pathway. It turned into what was at that time the biggest, most expensive government IT disaster the UK had ever seen. ICL was forced to take a £180 million hit on its revenue because it was so bad. The Benefits Agency pulled out and said, we don't have anything to do with this anymore. But the post office said, we still need the automation. So the contract was reconstituted, given back to ICL again, and said, take what you've done and evolve it instead into the system called Horizon that would automate all the post offices. Now, because ICL at this time, Fujitsu was its majority owner. ICL at this time was heading for a flotation. It was due to go through a public flotation. I think it was scheduled for in the year 2000, as I remember. And it would have been at that time the largest tech flotation in the UK. It was rumoured to be worth about £2 billion. So a lot now, but even more back in 2000. There was no way anybody in ICL could allow anything to stop that happening. We now know, because of whistleblowers who have talked to us since, that within the Horizon project team, there was a lot of awareness that the software they were developing had massive problems. They'd made some really bad architectural choices. They'd chosen to take some packaged software and develop some bespoke software and try and plug it all together and use specially designed terminals rather than taking things off the shelf. And it was just, it was turning into a dog's dinner. One guy that we talked to back in 2019, I think it was now, who was a senior project manager on that. If I can paraphrase his words, and I'll spell one out for you just in case. You know, he said that the software was a pile of SHIT, and everybody knew it. And this, you know, we now know this was being escalated up to the top of ICL, and basically the message that came back was, you know, it's fine. Don't worry, we'll sort the problems. You know, we need to hit these timescales. We'll sort the problems out in implementation. Corners were cut. Testing wasn't as thorough as it should have been, and this, you know, large, enormously complex IT system, an IT system that the Post Office and Fujitsu themselves described as the largest non-military IT project in Europe, was rolled out to post offices with known bugs in the software.
Okay, so the Fujitsu sale, I mean, the purchase by Fujitsu went swimmingly, but I guess they had due diligence. They probably knew that there were problems with the software, or we don't know.
I mean, you know, one presumes that these issues were raised at the top level, raised up to Fujitsu, but. You know, let's think back to that time, you know, 1999, 2000. This was a time when most of the public sector was being automated for the first time. Yes. Every government department was going through some big IT project, typically outsourced to some giant IT provider like ICL, like IBM, like EDS, if you remember them at the time. This was all part of Tony Blair's push at that period of time to automate government, e-government as he used to call it at the time. And the perception at that time was, we in government, we don't understand technology. All you big tech companies, you understand it. We're going to get you to come in and do all the work for us. Of course, we know with hindsight that those big tech companies didn't know much more about how to do enormously big, complicated IT projects than the government themselves did. And we know that because, you know, I've been a tech journalist since 2000, and I spent most of that first 10 years writing about all sorts of enormous big government IT disasters in all sorts of departments and all sorts of areas of the public sector. What was different with the Post Office, in most of those cases, somebody somewhere looked at the fact there was a problem with the IT and said, stop. For some reason, in the Post Office, they looked at this, and nobody said stop. They doubled down. Yeah. And a lot of that then comes back to the fact that although this software was flawed, it had lots of bugs in it, had lots of issues that were causing these accounting mismatches in there. It was the confluence of technology and people that caused this scandal. And the Post Office at the time, again, and this much of this came out during the Post Office public inquiry, and its head office had a pretty toxic culture. Pre-Horizon, because all the accounts in Post Office branches were being done manually, there was a strong perception among a lot of people at head office that most of these sub-postmasters were all on the take. They were all on the fiddle. It was a cash-based business. Remember, this was the 90s. There was no chip and pin. There was no contactless cards. This was cash and checks. And there was a perception that large numbers of the people were trousering a tenner here and there and all this sort of thing. So when they put in, when Horizon was put in, and suddenly it starts showing lists of people where, you know, the amount of cash, what they've sold doesn't match with the amount of cash they're declaring. Some people in the head office of the Post Office went, at last, we've got the thieving bastards. And they doubled down on prosecuting these people because it was reinforcing the bias that they already had. You know, if you can take the scandal back a little further to how this happened as well, back to 1995. You know, a lot of people certainly weren't aware then, might still not be aware now. The Post Office is one of a very small number of former public sector organisations that still has the power to bring prosecutions directly without any involvement from the Crown Prosecution Service or any external checks and balances. Now they've stopped doing it now because of this, because of the scandal. But at the time, the Post Office was allowed to charge people and take them to court and assign a barrister and prosecute them as if they were the state. In 1995, there was a big debate going on about the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, because all of a sudden, in lots of court cases, people were presenting evidence that had been generated from computers, because the public sector, the private sector, was getting more and more computerized. The law said that any evidence that was presented you had to prove its veracity. But there was a large body of opinion saying there was so much computer-based data coming through now that that you just can't do this. And computers are generally reliable. So there was a big consultation about a change in the law, and that was accepted. And the Police and Criminal Evidence Act was changed or introduced. It changed the balance of proof. And it said that any computer-based evidence will be deemed to be accurate unless proven otherwise. Now, we found out a number of years ago now, obviously when this consultation was going on, there was a lot of different opinions, there was a lot of lobbying going on. Guess which organisation was one of the strongest lobbyists in favour of changing the law? It was the Post Office. The Post Office actively lobbied the government to get this law changed. So then, the irony is the change in the law was passed in 1999, the same year that the Horizon rollout started. So as soon as the Post Office started taking sub-postmasters to court and prosecuting them for fraud or accounting errors or whichever charges that they were doing to them, the law said that if the Post Office presented the data and showed that there was a mismatch, that had to be true. There were some sub-postmasters who maybe they were a bit IT savvy, or maybe they had particularly good solicitors who tried to push back. And again, as we have learned since, in many of those cases, the Post Office had the data, but refused to provide it. They knowingly withheld evidence that could have cast a reasonable doubt on the chance of conviction for those sub postmasters. And that's all part of this perfect storm. The law changed, the government attitude to technology changed, the pressure that ICL and Fujitsu was under for the flotation. The fact that people were still learning how to build big, complex IT software systems at that time, and all of this surrounded by a company with an unconscious bias and a pretty toxic culture towards the people who are using this technology. And that, all that put together set the spark that created this awful scandal.
That's a really great point you made about the culture of most organizations at that time. Was computers were going to enable us to run it like a business, and be more efficient, catch mistakes, etc. Trusting the computer, but at the same time, it was clearly wrong for them to tell postmasters that you were the only one to have this. So people in the post office must realize that that's not true, that it was more than one. There was actually 50, I don't know how many people in the end have done this, but
I mean, most scandals, not just this one, start because of a lie. One example, as a football fan, the Hillsborough scandal started because a police officer on the day of Hillsborough lied and said football fans charged down a gate, and that's how they got in. And everything that happened after that point was to try and hide or defend that lie. With the post office, the lie was, you're the only person this is happening to. At some point, someone, somewhere in the post office, some individual, some group, some committee, whatever it was, must have made a decision to tell their help desk that if people say to you, it's a problem with the computer, you say to them, no, you're the only person that's getting this problem. We don't know who or when or how that happened, but basically everything that happened subsequently was in defense of that lie.
I don't know whether, I understand that Mr. Bates actually created a website so that he could share information, that people, even though he quit being a sub-postmaster, he created this website so other postmasters could inform people about the charges against them. With, I guess that may have contributed to it, but also was it news coverage that revealed this lie, that it was not isolated to.
Yeah, I mean, this was featured in the TV drama. It really was the case that for a lot of the victims of this, the first time they knew they had been lied to was when they read the Computer Weekly story in 2009 that showed a bunch of other people all saying, they told me I was the only one. And that was very much the catalyst for Alan and other members of the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, which was a campaign group that Alan set up to start persuading people they knew had problems to talk more publicly. And it started a bandwagon that made lots of other people who had no idea any of this was going on and just thought it was just them, suddenly find out that there were other people in the same boat. We now know, we still don't know the exact figure, and we perhaps never will, because a lot of people still don't want to, haven't come forward, don't want to come forward. But we know that it's almost only a little over 1,000 people who were prosecuted, and it's, I think the latest figure I saw was something like 7,000 or 8,000 people who, while not prosecuted, had to pay back money to the post office, and the post office claimed they had taken, that they hadn't taken. And when you think about the fact there was around about 12,500 post office branches at that time, and we now know that maybe 7,000 or 8,000 people had some sort of problem. It's just making, how could you possibly not see these things happening to so many people in the organisation, and nobody at the top of the organisation say, maybe it's us.
Well, there was also, I'm not sure if it's a lie or just misunderstanding, that it was a all the postmasters could work with their accounts, but it was all aggregated in a central office and central computer-based system. But they said it could not be changed remotely, so that the central office could not change anything. But it turns out they could.
That's right. Yeah. This was, one of the lies that was told to cover up the initial lie was that it was not possible to amend a branch's accounts remotely. And again, the post office stood behind this lie for some time, until eventually a whistleblower came forward, a chap called Richard Roll, who used to work for Fujitsu. And the first time he talked was on a talk publicly, was on a BBC Panorama, when he said, "Yep, I worked in the office in Fujitsu in Bracknell, and we would be going into sub-postmasters' accounts and changing them all the time." What was interesting about that, there's been a bit of a sort of conspiracy theory that says, maybe people in Fujitsu are doing this deliberately and siphoning off money. That's not the case. There's no evidence to suggest that. These were just, support techies who were going to make changes as part of their everyday task. They weren't fiddling money. But what this did do was, for the first time, it proved that the post office had been lying. There was actual proof to show that one of the lies the post office had been saying consistently was proved beyond all doubt to have been a lie. And again, that just then accelerates the scandal, and it gave more evidence to campaigners, to MPs, to journalists, to say, look, well, if they're lying about this, what else have they been lying about?
Well, journalists and also the Bates and others held the post office more accountable, but what were the factors that led to the lack of accountability within the post office? I guess people say the culture of the post office. What was it about the culture that is, they just have a top-down culture, or what elements of the culture of the post office?
During the post office inquiry, the former chief executive of the post office, Paula Bennells, was interviewed as a witness over 3 days. It was one of the highlights of the inquiry. She was chief executive when the scandal was unfolding. So after our story in 2009, although she also worked for the post office before that as well, and she was the public face of defending the scandal and denying that there was a problem for many years. She refuses to talk to the press, continues to refuse to talk to the press. So when she talked to the inquiry, everybody was showing great interest. She gave 3 days of occasionally very tearful testimony, in which, strangely, she couldn't remember a lot of things that happened at the time. Funny that. But she concluded her evidence when asked about, looking back, what might you have done differently? She concluded her evidence by saying, looking back, I think perhaps we prioritised the institution too much over the individual. Mm-hmm. And in that one line, I think she summarised everything that was wrong with the post office. Yeah. Because at all stages, every decision they made was all about protecting the post office, protecting the brand. Yeah. And what somehow the people at head office never seemed to be able to get through their heads was that to the entire public, to you, to me, to anybody who's ever walked into a post office branch and bought a stamp or sent a letter or whatever, the sub postmaster behind the desk that you're dealing with, they are the post office. Yeah. Those people are the post office. Yeah. How they never made that connection to this day, I cannot tell you. In trying to protect the brand as they saw it, and remember, in about the time that the Computer Weekly first story came out, the post office's marketing tagline was Britain's most trusted brand. Yeah. They were so determined to protect that, they completely took their eye off what today we would call the customer experience. Yeah. The customer experience was that face-to-face interaction with a sub postmaster in a branch. That, like so many parts of the scandal, offers so many lessons for us today in technology. And in that one, in terms of we're automating everything today. Technology is at the forefront of so many companies' interaction with their customers. Even more so now with AI, and we're all getting used to dealing with companies through AI chatbots. Always remember that, what is your customer's experience? Who and how does your customer interact with their brand? Yeah. It always comes back to people in the end. Yeah.
You remind me, from Postman Pat to all the people who deliver the mail and so forth. Yeah. The post office has a wonderful position to be trusted as an institution, because you know these, and you have this trust in the individual members, and then they could have taken advantage of that in terms of trying to champion the small entrepreneurs in the country. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we should turn to lessons learned. I mean, one of the things I wonder is if this had happened in the day of social media, maybe it would not have. Maybe it would have been discovered very early on that many postmasters had questions about this, because they could have communicated with one another. But from your perspective, what are the lessons learned for the IT industry, or the post office, for journalism, actually?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the point of view of technologists and people working in IT, I think the major lesson here is, I think it's something a lot of people in IT perhaps No, but perhaps less so in business. Technology is not a panacea. People, so many people in business and some in technology see technology as the solution to all their business problems or all their public service problems. We see it today. We've got a Prime Minister today who's talking about making billions of pounds of productivity savings across the civil service by implementing better technology and AI. Implementing better technology on its own never improved anything. I think you have to learn that people are always at the heart. People are always at the heart of this. Change is difficult, and what technology represents is change. And if all you're doing is implementing technology and you're not managing the change that goes with that at an employee, at a citizen, at a personal level, you've got a recipe for disaster there, without a doubt. The technology sector needs to learn from this because the tech sector sells technology as a panacea. It sells it as a solution to all your ills, and that's often setting people up for failure by doing so. Now, we know a lot more about how to implement technology now than we did 25 years ago. We know a lot more about software development. We're much better at software development now than we were 25 years ago. Software doesn't go wrong as often as it used to, without a doubt. But as you and I are sitting here now, 3 days ago, Cloudflare's network went down and took out a huge chunk of the internet. A couple of weeks ago, Microsoft Azure went down, took out a chunk of the internet. The week before that, Amazon Web Services went down, took out a chunk of the internet. Technology still goes wrong. And in a lot of these things, when the investigations are done and you try and find out what goes wrong, there's a little human error there that's been the cause of it. So I think from a technology perspective, absolutely, technology is not a panacea. I think the post office shows very much that if you're a leader of an organisation, if you're on the board, if you're a non-executive director who is looking to hold an organisation to account, you should be asking: Does this organisation have the skills and the awareness of what digital transformation really means, to be able to ask the right questions, both of our employees and of our suppliers? There was an unwillingness in the post office to ask the difficult questions, and of course, when they asked the difficult questions and were given the difficult answers, they ignored the difficult answers as well. But you need to have the skills and the awareness at the top of any organisation to make sure that you understand what's going on. You can't outsource. You must not outsource this critical knowledge now. Every organisation is a technology company these days. The world runs on technology, and if you're the chief executive or a board member of a company, you can no longer get away with saying, "Oh yeah, that's the IT department's stuff. I don't need to know about that." I'm sorry, you do. And I think as we're coming up onto the cusp of another revolution in technology now with AI. When we look back on the post office scandal now, once the flaws in the Horizon software were exposed, it became a lot easier to understand what happened and why it happened. We knew what questions to ask, and we got the answers for it. I wonder now if something similar happened with AI, where it's coming out of a black box, where we don't necessarily really understand how that AI, look at large language models, for example, how that AI is coming to the decisions that it's making. Do we even know the questions to ask anymore in order to find the answers when we're going to an era where we're putting so much trust into these big AI systems? we all know the potential of technology. We should all know well enough now that for every good side of technology, there's a likely unforeseen negative. Who would have thought in 2008, when we were all getting very excited about Facebook and social media, that barely 6 years later, Facebook would be being accused of helping to manipulate elections in authoritarian states. The biggest danger that we as technologists, and arguably increasingly we as a technological society face, is that we are not well prepared enough for the unforeseen consequences of new technologies. A couple of years ago, we had everybody talking about AI safety. Nobody's really talking about that anymore. It's all about how quickly can we roll it out? How quickly can we do it? How capable are these technologies? So overall, if there was one lesson I would like everybody to learn as a result of the post office scandal, it's to make sure that we are more honest with everybody about the potential downsides of exciting new technologies, as we are about the benefits for them, and put the mechanisms and the processes and the awareness in place to make sure that we are better able to deal with the unforeseen consequences if and when they happen.
One of the most enduring issues that you raised is who should know what about IT. And often people think the board of an organization shouldn't deal with IT. It's delegate that, or they might not even want it explained to them. But more and more, I have a sense that everybody feels like most people should know, because everybody's using IT, and AI will be in the over 90% of youth now probably using AI chatbots and so forth. So it's more and more accepted that we all need to know more about IT, and I think that's right. But I mean, do you have a sense from Computer Weekly that you probably, when you in 2009, you were probably speaking primarily to IT people?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Are you speaking to a larger audience now, or is it still a problem?
I mean, yes, we are speaking to a larger audience. Yes, there are more people in business functions and at the top of organisations now who take an active interest in technology from the perspective of what it can do for their organisation, how it can benefit their organisation, what does digital transformation really mean, what new business opportunities does this open up for us as an organisation. I think where it's still lacking is I still don't think there's enough awareness or knowledge to ask the difficult questions. Every chief executive wants their chief information officer, chief technology officer, whatever job title the senior tech person has got in any particular organisation, to come along and tell them, yep, X% savings, X%, X million pounds additional revenue, this much, these many productivity savings. They still don't want them to come along and say, we've got a real problem here. Let's just look at another topic, a couple of topical examples. Jaguar Land Rover, has lost tens, I think hundreds of millions of pounds as a result of the cybersecurity attack that it faced earlier this year. We even had, I think, in the last couple of weeks, the latest GDP figures coming out, and they actually attributed a drop in GDP growth partly to the Jaguar Land Rover cybersecurity attack, because it had such a widespread effect on the manufacturing supply chain in the Midlands that supported them. What more indication do boardrooms across the country, politicians across the country need to make sure they are aware of the potential downsides and what can go wrong with technology, and be able to ask the difficult questions and understand the difficult answers, than the fact that one ransomware attack can actually, affect the economic growth of an entire country.
I think it's clear more and more people are realizing that we all have to know more about IT. We have to understand it because the resilience of our business, our government, our household, being able to operate is actually dependent on making sure that we're secure, safe at home, so forth. But one of the problems you must face daily is that there was an old story I heard about when they tried to explain to people how a television program is made. And once they heard the discussion of exactly how a television program was made, they were more mystified than before. And I think that happens in IT.
Yeah.
You explain, this is how the accounting system works, and this is what went wrong with these ledgers and so forth. And people are probably even more confused than. I mean, how do you deal with that? And I guess in trying to reach a broader audience, do you think it's an insurmountable problem, or are there ways in which we can do that?
I mean, I think it is a very difficult problem. It's one we've talked about for decades in tech, isn't it? How do we educate the people outside of tech to get enough of an understanding about what we do? And it's changing gradually. It is partly a generational thing. You alluded earlier to younger generations who are more familiar with technology as they rise up into more senior positions. That brings a fresh awareness as well.
I'm not sure if the Bates program actually communicated what happened, but it certainly communicated the consequences of.
I mean, I think what they did extremely well in the post-COVID scandal TV drama was finding a way to relate the technology problems to people individually.
Yes.
The single most impactful scene from the TV show was where you had Joe Hamilton, the sub-postman Joe Hamilton, and this was a real life scene. I've talked to Joe, it's exactly how it happened. Sitting at her screen, the numbers would add up. She's on the phone to the help desk. She's explaining what's happened. They say, we'll do this. She does this, and the loss on the screen doubled.
Yes, I remember that.
You remember the scene?
Yeah.
And I think that tapped into everybody's experience of sitting at a computer, doing something, and it's not doing what you expect it to do, and you just don't know what to do about it. For most people, it doesn't matter. You'll step away, you'll switch it off, turn it back on again, and it will be fine. But for Jo, that moment changed her life completely. And I think that made ordinary people watching on TV realise this could have been my aunt, my granny, my mum, my dad, could have been me. And I think the message it did put out was, yes, we all need to be a bit more aware of this technology that we're relying on every day. We joke about computer says no, but we should, we do all need to do better on that. Now that at a societal level, that comes down obviously to education. Yeah. There are huge problems there. We still haven't got education, IT education right in schools. Only recently, the government has announced that they're overhauling the computer science, computer studies curriculum again at a GCSE level. This happens every few years because it never quite keeps up with technology. It's not a massively popular topic in school because it's just not well taught. But we've got a generation who are living on their phones. There's such a mismatch there. How can you have this generation who live on their phones, live on technology, yet we can't excite them about understanding what a bit more about what they do. And I do think that the technology sector has to take its own share of the blame here as well. When I look at all the material that comes out from IT companies, it's all features and functions and speeds and feeds and all this sort of thing. To me, the tech sector is really bad at storytelling. They can't they're not very good at taking what they do and explaining it in a way that relates to people's everyday lives, or if you're a chief executive, to the challenges of running a business. It's much easier for them to sell a product. To me, I think you know, we can't carry on just selling a product, because we're not selling a product, we're selling a capability. Yeah. We're selling the ability to transform an organization. Ultimately, we're selling the ability to transform society potentially with AI. And we have to change the conversation from here's a product with a bunch of features and functions to a wider narrative about what this means, what the challenges are, and what are the questions that we all need to ask in order to make sure that we are going to all get the undoubted benefits that the potential of new technology offers to us.
I think that's much of the promise. I think it's no longer an embarrassment to ask people how do I do this on my computer?
Yeah.
What's going on here? Why is this happening? And they communicate over, on their block or on their road, everybody doesn't need to read Computer Weekly. I'm sorry, but as long as some people
I hope they will, but yeah,
they can inform their neighbors and their family and so forth about it. So it's this, two-step flow of information. We can't popularize it too much, but I think more people are trying to learn more from their friends and or coworkers and so forth. But thanks to journalism, I mean, journalism really shown in this situation with the ITV issue, but also the continuing coverage by Computer Weekly, and I guess Private Eye has done a great job as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you very much for speaking to us about.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking the questions and taking an interest.
Okay.